right. Yesterday we learned that the main officer involved, whose knee you see on George Floyd's neck for what seems like forever, had his charges upgraded from third-degree murder to second-degree murder. What that means is that the prosecutors have taken a long, hard look at all the evidence, and to go from third-degree murder to second-degree murder means that they are inferring there was some kind of intent to kill. At the same time, they've charged the three other officers who were with him who did nothing to intervene. So there's two memorials that have gone on today. One was in New York, where one of the deceased George Floyd's brothers lives, and there was one in Minneapolis, where the rest of his family lives and his 6-year-old daughter lives. And even during these memorials, the three other cops ended up facing court. And with their aiding and abetting charges, they've been $1 million bail, and they have to surrender all their weapons. And as of right now, I don't know if they've actually been bailed. But look, you know, the violence does still continue. There's a protester in a state here in America who got hit in the head with a rubber bullet and now has brain damage. There was a New York police officer last night who got stabbed, and then somehow the guy got his gun off him and shot 2 more police officers. But by and large, all these mass demonstrations have gone from riots to protests. And amazing things are happening, even as this country tears itself apart. Down here in Los Angeles at Town Hall, the crowd went up to the soldiers on the streets and asked them to march with them. Well, obviously the soldiers couldn't do that. So you know what they did? They took a knee, all of them. And last night, it was incredible. Last night, here in Los Angeles, the call was put out, 9 p.m., light your torch on your footpath in front of your house and point it to the sky for the 8 minutes and 46 seconds it took George Floyd to die. They lit up Dodger Stadium for those 8 minutes, 46 seconds. Here on my street, the whole street was filled with families with torches. And look, in Australia, it's a bit hard to understand the enormity of this and the stakes of this. I mean, we don't have the history of slavery that we have here, but at the memorial in Minneapolis for George Floyd just today, the Reverend Al Sharpton, a controversial civil rights figure, I think actually summed up the tone of the country just right. Listen to this.
George Floyd's story has been the story of black folks, because ever since 401 years ago, the reason we could never be who we wanted and dreamed to be in is you kept your knee on our neck.
And Michael, President Trump's threat to take over America's streets, filling them with soldiers at his command, it's driven quite the wedge between the White House and the Pentagon.
Absolutely. I mean, President Trump is striking a stake sort of into the heart of our democratic institutions. I mean, civilian leadership of the military is a vital, essential part of any democracy. But, you know, this is a president who loves military parades. This is a president who insisted that he have battle tanks at his 4th of July ceremony. Yet this is a president who, through his actions right now in response to these protests, risks losing the faith of the 1 million odd troops, sailors and Air Force that he currently commands. Now, you know, we remember what we're seeing now, the vision we're seeing now, the church visit horror show where peaceful protesters were violently removed just to allow the president to do this. Well, standing alongside the president as he did this was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the head of the military, and his defense secretary. Well, what happened is that overnight, the most recent defense secretary, General Jim Bulldog Mattis, who served President Trump, came out and said, Donald Trump is the first president in my lifetime who does not even pretend to try to unite America. He instead tries to divide it, said General Mattis. What we're witnessing, he says, is 3 years without mature leadership. This is a Republican president. Meanwhile, the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, an old mate of mine from Iraq, who you see in fatigues walking to that church on that horrid visit, he issued a command to all the top officers to remind their troops that we swore an oath to the Constitution. And that's a Constitution that involves the right to free speech and the right to free assembly. And finally, the current Secretary of Defense, while President Trump has been calling or discussing or threatening to use what's called the Insurrection Act of 1807, that would allow him to take over the National Guard troops in various states in order to dominate the streets and dominate the riots. Well, that's been seen as a step towards martial law. And his own Secretary of Defense has just broken with the president. Listen to this.
I've always believed and continue to believe that the National Guard is best suited for performing domestic support to civil authorities in these situations in support of local law enforcement. I say this not only as Secretary of Defense, but also as a former soldier and a former member of the National Guard. The option to use active duty forces in a law enforcement role should only be used as a matter of last resort and only in the most urgent and dire of situations. We are not in one of those situations now. I do not support invoking the Insurrection Act.
And in response to those remarks, the president's White House spokeswoman said, perhaps ominously, as of right now, Secretary Esper is still Secretary Esper. We know the fate of top officials who break with this president.